I want you to picture a scenario. It's, I don't know, a Tuesday morning. You're in your office, coffee's hot, and you're feeling pretty good.
Hmm.
You've spent the last, what, 10, maybe 15 years just grinding it out. You've built a solid business here in South Africa, generated some real wealth.
The dream, right?
Absolutely. Maybe you bought a nice property in the winelands, you've got a portfolio, and because you built it, you keep all these assets in your personal name. It feels safe. It's yours.
It feels safe. It feels like ownership until it isn't.
Exactly. And then, completely out of the blue, one lawsuit, a SARS audit that just goes sideways, or maybe a business partner goes into liquidation, and suddenly everything is on the table.
Everything.
Your house, your savings, your legacy, it could all just vanish.
It's the ultimate nightmare scenario. And the tragedy is, it's so much more common than people think. It happens because there's a fundamental misunderstanding, really, about ownership versus risk.
So today, we are going to try and fix that. We're doing a deep dive into a concept we're calling building the fortress.
I like that.
It's this idea that you can, and probably should, separate your ownership from your risk. And we're going to look at a very specific, very powerful tool to do that, the South African Trust.
But we need to be really clear here. We're not just talking about having a trust.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about why most trusts in South Africa are, frankly, paper tigers.
Paper tigers.
They look scary, they look impressive, but the moment you poke them, they just fall apart.
Right, because we're diving into the constitution of the trust deed itself. And to help us navigate this, we're looking at the work of Limke Sturman. She's a trust consultant and asset protection specialist.
And she has this fascinating philosophy. She says most business owners are unknowingly walking around with a giant target on their back.
Because they don't have that firewall.
Exactly. No firewall between their business risks and their personal assets. And that firewall, that's the fortress we're talking about. Blumke's approach is all about education, making sure you understand the machinery. Because a bad trust deed is built on sand, but a good one. That secures a legacy.
Okay, so let's unpack this fortress strategy. Why even bother? I mean, isn't having a Plidi Ltd company enough protection?
You'd think so, but let's look at the problem Blumke points out. Most entrepreneurs have what's called mixed liability. You've got your trading company, and it also holds valuable assets. Or worse,
Let me guess.
you've signed personal sureties for your business debts.
Ah, the dreaded personal surety. That's the bank making sure if the business sinks, you go down with the ship.
Precisely. If your company gets sued, and that company owns, say, the warehouse it operates from, that warehouse is gone. If you sign surety, your personal house is gone.
So the fortress structure just flips that.
Flips it completely on its head. The idea is simple, but it's profound. The trust owns the assets. The company carries the risk.
I love that golden rule Limke uses. You control everything, but own nothing.
That is the mantra. It's key. If you own nothing in your personal capacity, a creditor can't touch it. They can't take what you don't have. But through the trust, you maintain full control over how those assets are used.
So it's creditor protection, but also generational continuity.
Exactly. And we can't ignore the tax angle either. That's usually the first question people ask.
Of course.
And for good reason. A proper trust structure is huge for capping estate duty. If your assets are growing inside a trust, they're not growing in your personal estate, you're limiting that future tax bill. Not to mention capital gains tax and the very tricky Section 7C rules for loans.
But the core why is safety.
It's sleep-at-night insurance.
Okay, so we're sold. We want a fortress. But this is where it gets, honestly, a little terrifying. You can't just sign a paper and say, I have a trust. The danger is in the document, the trust deed.
This is the most critical part of our deep dive. Think about a company. Companies operate under the Companies Act. It's this massive piece of legislation that fills in all the blanks.
It's a safety net.
It is. If your company constitution is a bit vague, the Act steps in with default rules. But trusts, there's no Trusts Act that works like that. The Trust Property Control Act is very high level.
So if it's not in the deed,
It doesn't exist. Your deed is the entire Constitution. And if that Constitution is flawed, you are in serious trouble.
we have some brutal examples of this. Let's start with the founder, the person setting it all up.
Seems so simple.
All right.
But look at the Vandermeer case. He set up a trust back in 2008. The deed just identified him as M. Vandermeer.
Just an initial, no ID number.
No ID number. Years later, the trust needs to do a deal with a bank. The bank's compliance department, which is paranoid about money laundering, looks at the deed and says, Who is M. Vettermerway? Can you prove it?
Oh, what a headache.
A massive headache, just to prove the trust was validly established,
Oh.
all because of a missing ID number.
It seems so small, but here's a scarier one. The James and Patricia Thompson example. This is what you call the founder's trap.
It is. So James and Patricia set up their trust, but they were nervous.
Right.
They couldn't quite let go. So in the deed, they reserved the power to revoke the trust.
So they could just change their minds and say, just kidding, give us the assets back.
Essentially, yes. And because they held that power, SARS looked at it and said, well, if you can take it back at any time, you haven't actually given it away.
Oh, no.
So when James died, all of those trust assets were dragged right back into his personal estate for estate duty.
Defeating the entire point of the trust in the first place.
Completely. And this is a huge red flag Lumco warns about. It's related to Section 7 of the Income Tax Act. If a founder keeps too much power, if they're still pulling all the strings, SARS sees straight through it. You have to sever that string to get the protection.
It's a very delicate balance then.
It is. You want control, but not too much control.
Right. Okay, let's move on to the people running the show. The trustees, I think a lot of people just see them as signatures they need to collect once a year.
Which is a fatal mistake. In South Africa, especially with family trusts, you have a legal requirement for an independent trustee. This isn't just a friendly suggestion.
The master of the high court and the banks basically insist on it. We saw that with the David and Elizabeth Kruger story.
We did. They named themselves and their son as trustees, all family. They walked into the bank to open an account, and the bank just showed them the door.
Right.
Refused to open the account. No independent oversight. They had to scramble to find an accountant, amend the deed, just to get a simple bank account.
I get it, though. The trust needs to be seen as separate. But what happens when the trustees disagree? Because families fight.
Oh, they do. And that's where the voting clauses in the deed become absolutely life or death.
Yeah.
You have to decide, is it a unanimous vote or a majority vote?
I think unanimous is safer, right? Everyone has to agree.
It sounds safer, but it's a recipe for deadlock. Look at the Green family. Their deed required unanimity. The parents disagreed on selling a property. They had an independent trustee, but he was powerless.
Because he couldn't break the tie.
Exactly. Even if he sided with one parent, the other could just veto it. The trust was paralyzed. The assets were just frozen because mom and dad couldn't agree.
And it gets worse if you can't fire a bad trustee.
The Robertson family case. It's a nightmare. One of the trustees started acting improperly, really bad conduct. But the deed said removal required unanimous beneficiary consent.
And one of the beneficiaries just said no.
Said no. Because they were actually benefiting from the trustee's bad behavior. So the whole family was stuck with this rogue trustee handcuffed by their own document.
That's terrifying. And what about the Botha Trust?
A professional trustee, someone charging fees, simply refused to resign because they wanted to keep collecting those fees. The deed had no mechanism to force them out. The family was held hostage.
So the lesson is, check your removal clauses. Make sure you can actually fire the people you hire. Let's shift to the beneficiaries. This seems like the easy part.
You would think so. But the Jennifer and Mark Van Niekerk story is a perfect example of how being too specific backfires.
They named their 3 kids in the deed.
By name, Tom, Dick, and Harry, basically. 2 years later, what happens?
Baby number 4 comes along.
Exactly. But the deed is a closed list. So that 4th child was legally not a beneficiary. They had to pay lawyers, go to the master's office, all this unnecessary stress and cost.
When it could have just said the children of the founders.
Exactly. Define a class of beneficiaries.
Yeah.
It future-proofs the trust. But the bigger issue is vested versus discretionary rights. This is vital for asset protection.
Okay, explain that difference. It sounds like legal jargon, but I know it's crucial.
It's everything. A vested right means the money is theirs. The beneficiary is entitled to it. The trustees must pay them. A discretionary right means the trustees decide if and when they get anything.
And discretionary is better because...
Because of the Hamilton Trust. The deed gave the child a vested right to a lump sum at age 25. The problem, at 25, the child was battling a severe addiction.
Oh, wow.
The parents knew that giving him that cash would effectively be funding his own destruction. But because it was vested,
I had no choice. They had to pay him.
they had to. If it had been discretionary, they could have withheld the funds, paid for rehab directly, and protected him from himself.
That is so powerful. It's not just protecting money from tax, it's protecting your family from their own vulnerabilities.
And from their creditors. That's the spendthrift clause. In the Thomas Green example, he went insolvent, personally bankrupt.
So his creditors came knocking.
They did. looking for his share of the family trust. But because the trust was discretionary and had a spendthrift clause, they couldn't touch a cent. The fortress stood strong, even when the person inside had fallen.
That really drives home the whole fortress metaphor. Okay, a lot of our listeners are business owners. The trust doesn't just hold cash, it often owns the shares of the actual business.
And that adds a whole new layer of complexity. If your trust owns your business, who votes those shares? Who appoints the directors?
The Jenkins Family Trust ran straight into this.
They did. The trust owned 60% of a company, a huge controlling stake. But the deed didn't explicitly say the trustees had the power to vote those shares.
It was just silent on the issue.
Completely silent. So when a critical business decision came up, it was chaos. The other directors challenged the trustees' right to even vote. The business just ground to a halt.
It's amazing how the silences in the deed caused the loudest problems.
Silence is the absolute enemy of a good trust deed. You have to speak to the future. Which brings us to purpose clauses. Why does the trust exist? The Cooper Trust is a heartbreaking example.
That was the education one, right?
Yes, established in 1985, the purpose was to pay for university education. Sounds noble. But fast forward to today.
Where we have online courses, coding boot camps.
All sorts of things that aren't a traditional university. The trustees struggled to fund a grandchild's education because the deed was so rigidly stuck in 1985.
They had the money, they had the desire, but the rulebook from decades ago said no.
That's it. And we see it with investment mandates, too. The Harrison Trust forced trustees to only buy property. Property is always safe, the founder thought. Well, years later, in a bad market, the trustees were forced to buy property in a slump instead of better investments.
This is why Lemke talks about the deed being a living document. You can't just set it and forget it for 40 years.
Absolutely not. A deed written even 10 years ago could be full of red flags. Tax laws change, family dynamics change. If you're not reviewing it, you're drifting towards an iceberg.
Which brings us to the question everyone's thinking, can I just, download a template? Google is free.
You can. And you can also perform your own dentistry, but I wouldn't recommend it.
Fair point.
Lemke is very, very clear on this. Generic templates are dangerous. They're full of blanks, they're full of assumptions, they don't know your family, they don't know about the child with an addiction issue, or the business with a complex shareholder agreement.
So this is where her role as a trust consultant is different from just a lawyer drafting a document.
It is different. A lawyer often drafts what you tell them to. A consultant like Lemke does a foundation audit first. She looks for the cracks in your current setup. She offers an asset protection blueprint. It's strategic.
I notice on her site, she offers these specific services like a risk assessment for your business versus personal exposure and a fortress review, which is that annual checkup we just realized is so critical.
And she emphasizes education. That's the key. She wants to prevent sham trusts. That's when you have the paperwork, but you don't act like it's a trust. You treat it like your personal wallet.
And if you do that, the courts can just tear it down.
They will. Lemke teaches you how to act like a trustee, how to run the trust properly, so the fortress actually holds up under pressure.
So if you're a business owner or just anyone building assets, you have to stop thinking of a trust as some kind of tax dodge and start seeing it as a survival strategy.
Absolutely. The fortress isn't just a marketing term. It is a legal reality.
Okay, let's bring it all home. We've been through the horror stories, missing IDs, bad removal clauses, rigid definitions that just trap your legacy.
And we've covered the solution. A custom-drafted, well-thought-out trust deed that separates risk from assets. A deed that acts as a constitution, not a constraint.
I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. We've talked about a lot of technical stuff, but let's make it personal.
I'll leave you with this provocation. If you were to pass away today, right now, would your business assets be frozen in your estate, tied up for months, maybe years, while the courts sort it out?
Would your family be fighting over a vague document?
Or would your assets flow seamlessly to the next generation? Protected, accessible, and managed exactly the way you intended.
That's the difference between a plan and a wish.
It is. And if you don't know the answer to that question, you need to find out.
And if you want to build that fortress, or maybe you have an old trust that needs a serious audit before it crumbles, you need a guide. You can find Limca Sturman at www.limcasturman.com.
I believe she even has a wait list for her Asset Protection Fortress service, which really just speaks to the demand for this kind of specialized expertise.
Definitely. Don't wait for the lawsuit or the audit to find out your fortress is made of paper. Go check it out. That's www.lumcasterman.com. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Always a pleasure. Keep building.
See you next time.